Next we have Brian Mazo. Brian Mazo had his column in a sports collectibles magazine at the age of 13. Since then he has graduated from NYU Film School, had a few movies produced from his screenplays, and written for a number of newspapers and magazines. Mazo, a recent transplant to the Twin Cities, lives in Uptown with Thurman, a Russian blue cat. The short story collection, A Rose by Any Other Name, is his first published book. He is currently working on a novel entitled Live Fast, Die Out of Town. Please welcome Brian Mazo.
Thank you, Satish, for inviting me back to the St Paul Almanac, and to David here at Subtext for asking to have my book on the shelf here, which is available for purchase. So my book is called A Rose by Any Other Name. It's 26 snapshot short stories, each a moment between a man and a woman, one for every letter of the alphabet, and each title includes her name and sort of a play on words, including her name. So there's Hail Mary and Dear Jane and Mustang Sally. I am going to try and edit out a few expletives in the story that I'm going to read, which is called Last Page.
No worries.
Yeah, it's okay. Just go.
Okay.
Just go.
Well, there you
You're the
go.
ones that brought them. Just go.
Last page. As steeled as he was for the inevitable sound, Russell couldn't help but be startled a little when the door slammed. Paige slammed it for effect, and harder than he imagined she would, and it was indeed effective. Under the reverberation, he heard a softer crashing sound, accompanied by the twinkle of shattering glass. This did not surprise him, as he sort of expected that to follow. Russell strode to the front door, confident in the ironic evidence he just knew he'd find. But no, the framed picture that fell from the hallway close to the front door of the apartment they'd shared for 3 years was not of Paige and Russell in happier times. Although, as he stacked the broken shards atop the picture, he reflected that it was of their two sets of folks together, a combined 83 years of marital bliss, and he thought, close enough. Russell considered salvaging the broken picture, but then, just as he had thought during the end of the argument that led up to the whole door slamming and picture breaking, the overwhelming emotion became, just fuck it, and he tossed it in the trash. It was over. He knew it. She had confirmed it. He had an hour's window to get some of his stuff together. Russell fully planned on being gone by the time she returned. As they were winding up the battle, he had already envisioned his exit strategy. Russell would just grab what he needed for a few days and call his brother, who lived around the corner in their gentrifying section of Brooklyn, to alert him of his imminent arrival. He would pick up a 6-pack of Brooklyn Lager and a 6-pack of Guinness on the way over. He knew Robert's wife would have a very thin and very tightly rolled joint prepared and waiting in an ashtray by this hour. Russell would consume a couple of the Black and Tans, most of the joint, and tell them just enough to secure the couch for a few nights. That was it. That was the extent of his plan. He ran his hand through his hair and breathed deeply. Yeah, this was abrupt. He was sort of expecting it for some time. As much as he had tried to put a happy face on it, deep down he knew that they were just one major blowout from the terminal explosion. As he wandered back into the living room, ground zero as it were, he spied her book still resting comfortably on the arm of the chair, oblivious to all the shoutings and recriminations that still reverberated in his head. She never used a bookmark, and it disturbed him, especially when she broke the spines of his books. But it also bothered him when she did it to her own books, so he knew, like most things, that blame never rested completely on one side of the bed. But seeing Paige's open book there brought back a flood of unwanted good memories as well. She had this amazing ability to simply transport to her happy place by just burying her nose in the right book. He could take her to a baseball game, and she'd bring a book and be content. She would even go on beer runs for him, happily reading as she stood on the long line at the one beer stand in the upper deck at Yankee Stadium that sold good and imported beer rather than the tasteless swill in waxy paper cups that could be obtained while in their seats. She didn't understand the difference, but was willing to accept the fact that he did. Yes, Paige and her books had a special relationship. He would be jealous if he hadn't benefited from it. When all of Russell's kind words and caresses couldn't do enough to soothe her when required, he could suggest a certain tone, and like a balm, it would almost always do the trick. Occasionally, he would have to draw her a bath and shake her one of his perfect martinis to accompany the book, but it was a small price to pay to be left alone with whatever crappy horror flick Netflix had deemed to deliver that day. Alone. Yeah, he was going to have all the alone he wanted now. An unwanted, unexpected tear welled up in his eye, and Russell grunted, "Fuck you," to the book, as much as to the image of Paige in his mind's eye. He stomped over, grabbed the book, and heaved it as hard as he could against the wall. It flew faster and straighter than he expected it to, like a bird with paper wings, but it also crashed like one, sliding down the far wall like that same bird, smashing against the plate glass window it hadn't seen. The book came to a rest on the floor, all broken wings and spine and torn pages. Torn pages. The animal instinct part of him would have liked to tear a page from limb to limb. He had never hit her. He had never hit any woman. Christ, he hadn't hit another man in anger since the 6th grade. But right at this moment, the desire for destruction bubbled up like bile in his throat. He grabbed the broken book by its wounded wingspan and yanked out the torn pages. It felt good. Really, really good. He tried to hurt her during their final fight, and he did, but he failed to deliver the knockout blow. Their 3-year relationship ended on a technicality. It went to the judges' scorecards. At that moment, he realized, when he informed his friends that he was again single, that he couldn't precisely, truthfully, tell them that he had finally dumped Paige. But it really wasn't crucial. They were in their 30s. Now, still breathing hard and holding the ripped pages in his fist, he looked at the floor-to-ceiling bookshelf she had built, and much like the Grinch, an evil idea spread over him, darkening his heart. He swept an armful of her books onto the floor, and then squatting beside one of them, he grabbed a handful of pages from the back of the book and yanked them out. They didn't come out easily, but when they did, he could taste the satisfaction, like blood, and the knowledge that this would hurt her even more than it hurt the books. It took him a while, but he finally got a system down. He'd use his right hand to tilt a book from the shelf, revealing the back of it, and he'd use his left hand to rip out the last page. Just the last page, and then Russell would let the book drop back into its proper place on the shelf. As the single torn pages accumulated like snowdrifts at his feet, he glanced down at the time on his cell phone. Paige could be back soon. Russell didn't think she'd give him any less time than the agreed-upon hour, but he didn't want to be caught red-handed. He hurriedly completed the task of removing the last page of each and every one of her books. He paused for a moment on one of her signed first editions, but after killing that one, genocide became as easy as pulling the wings off a fly. Russell had just finished throwing some clothes into the hefty cinch sack containing all of Paige's conclusions when he heard her key turn in the lock. He glanced at the time. She was indeed early, before cinching the sack. He steadied himself as she called out, "Russell, are you still here?" Her voice, though raspy, sounded soft, even sweet. "Living room," said Russell. Paige stepped into the doorway. She obviously had been crying, but right now she was smiling at him tentatively. "Baby," she cooed, "I'm sorry. Please don't leave." He just stared at her. The hefty cinch sack clutched tightly in his right hand, his cell phone swaying in his left. "You sure?" he said. She bit her quivering lower lip and nodded up at him. Paige, fresh tears in her big brown eyes, said, "Can I have a hug, Russ?" He dropped the bag by his side and opened his arms, and she immediately filled them, melting into his body completely as if she had been made precisely to fill that cavity. As he hugged her as tightly as she needed to be held, as tightly as he needed to hold her, he glanced down at the hefty bag by their feet. Shit, was all he thought. He could come clean. He could tell her what he did. He could offer to repair her books. He could promise to replace them. But he knew, as soon as she realized the cruelty of which he was capable, for she would surely see this as if he had disfigured all of her friends, there would be no possibility of reconciliation. Russell tried to calculate how long it would take her to realize what he had done as he held on to Paige for dear life. Thank you.